The first is Silphium.
Yeah.
So we'll devote much attention to this and much time. The second star is Maciej Helbig, who is an independent researcher from Katowice in Silesia. He has just published a book on plants in Virgil and will be presenting, hopefully, this book tomorrow when we reunite for something like some tastes and flavors of antiquity. The third star is Christopher Grochu, who is the husband of Sally Grainger, and a very famous and very efficient classicist who assisted and did the job at the edition of Apicius. And this is a very, very, very important book for us. This is one of the Bibles. So this is very important, and I just wanted to underline the fact that we are very honored that you wanted to join your beloved wife and be with us today. This is another special. And of course, the gem and the creme de la creme is Dr. Sally Grainger, who is not only a classicist, but which is extremely important, she's a chef. And I just remember myself being in London and buying from the shop of which was British Museum, the classical cookbook, which she published in cooperation with Andrew Dalby. And then other books followed, like Cooking Apicius, and first of all, your edition, I mean, Christopher and Sally, your edition of Apicius. And of course, then, very, very, very important step, publishing the story of Garum. And Garum is one of not that much of enigmas, but a sort of nowadays mysterious addition to food, but a staple probably in antiquity, and which is very important that the book is just fully professional, not only from the classical point of view and editing, but also from like reenactment and something like much and much experience and then Paideia put into the book. And today we'll be talking about Silphium, and I won't be taking much time because this is the most important subject and another mystery of antiquity. We'll try to resolve it to some extent, not that much. But we'll show, yes. We'll be seeing something like ways of substituting, and the same as the Romans did it.
Absolutely,
exactly. And tomorrow, if you like to join us, we'll have a presentation of food, which includes not all, but some of the conclusions reached by Sally Grainger and others as far as Silphium and generally Roman food is concerned. So this was a lengthy introduction, and now let me give the screen probably to Maciej first, and then to Sally Grainger.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Kokoszko, and thank you very much for having me here. It's a really, first of all, an honor. Second of all, a big pleasure to be at the same place with my guru of my cooking attempts, I would say, and reconstructions with Sally Grainger right next to me, and it's like a dream come true. So thank you very much for having me here. So without any further ado, let's start with the biggest botanical enigma of antiquity, the Silphium itself. So let's start with the father of botany. So a few facts about Theophrastus Averroes, one of the first who writes something more about Silphium and writes even in a botanical way, so we can have some botanical source about Silphium. So first of all, he's a pupil and successor of Aristotle. He's the most versatile scholar of antiquity. So I would not exaggerate if I said that he was able to merge any kind of known branch of science in antiquity. If we believe the Diogenes Laertius, he attributes to Theophrastus 227 treatises. He mentions in 227 titles. Unfortunately, not all of them were preserved. And Theophrastus is known for most of all, for me, for example, for the botanist, for his two botanical works, the Historia Plantarum Periphyton Historias and the Causis Plantarum Periphyton Aetion. These are, I guess, staple treatises for botany in antiquity. Some botanists even read the Theophrastus today just to give him the palm, but he's the first one who ever decided to treat botany as a separate branch. So let's go to, for those who are speaking Polish or studying in Poland, if you are interested in Polish translations, the first one, so the Inquiry into Plants, Badania nad roślinami by Jerzy Schneider, 1969, 400 examples. However, the paper is so acidy and it's breaking in your hands, and most libraries do not allow xerocopying. There is somewhere in the internet the PDF version scanned from that. However, the best way is just to take some photos if you need to go to. Unfortunately, they don't want to reproduce that, whatever reason is. The demand for the Polish translation was and still is quite huge. However, this book doesn't have much luck. Better luck with Periphyton Aetion, the Causis Plantarum, so the physiology of plants. It's still available, even though published nearly 22 years ago, but still available also in PDF. So the second one is far much better than the first one. If you try to get that, as I said, the paper is very, very crumbly. It's so acid. It's so much acid. I don't know if they didn't have any money or just they didn't want to spend any more. They just printed 400 examples, 400 books, and that's it. The Polish translation by Schneider is very good. He consulted all the Krakow Institute of Botany of Polish Academy of Sciences, especially late Professor Dyakowska, which helped him with the plant identification. So it's pretty accurate. However, this good book and faith is not very good. But let's go to a plant called in antiquity Silphium, Lacerpitium, Lacerpitium, different names, Lacer, Laceris. Now, Theophrastus says that this plant is mostly distributed in Cyrenaican region of northern Africa. So Theophrastus says that in Cyrenaica, cypresses and the most beautiful olives grow with an abundance of oil. The most distinctive plant, however, is Silphium. This is what he says, and this is what we are talking about. So this is the region of Cyrenaica in northern Africa, modern-day Libya, and unfortunately, extremely fragile and extremely changeable political situation in Libya. Unfortunately, does not help us with doing any more archaeological or archaeobotanical examining what's left. Unfortunately, like the last time when archaeologists were allowed to do something, it's like nearly 30 or 35 years ago, and that's it. Theophrastus also mentions the habitat, so where the plant grows. So this is the English translation. It grows in many parts of Libya, reportedly over an area greater than 400 stadia, but it's most abundant in Syrtis, starting from Euesperides. So this is the main range of Silphium according to Theophrastus. So we would say that it is an endemic species from modern-day Libya, region of Cyrene, as we would say. One of the examples that Silphium is mentioned in Roman poetry is, of course, Catullus, the beloved Catullus. When in one of his poems, he says, "How many kisses would be more than enough, or even more than enough for me? Like, how many sand is in Libya that is being covered with Silphium? So there's how many kisses is as great as the number of grains of sand in Cyrene covered with Silphium." I left Silphium because there are so many different translations and interpretations. So let's focus on Silphium right now. Because this is how Curena, Cyrene looks like. Let's say nowadays, the last time when archaeologists were allowed it to be there. This is what's left. Magnificent city. A lovely one. Funny thing. Now you will see, this is a photo from Corpus Vasorum Antiquorum, the Archesilas cup from 6th century, which is supposed to depict weighing of Silphium. I'm not very sure. Let's say they weigh something. But if it's Silphium, we don't know. But people like to interpret it this way. I'm not going to say that, okay, no. Let's say that probably it depicts weighing of something that is measured in gold and silver. Okay, so this is how it looks like when you fix the colors properly. Many people before Theophrastus mentioned Silphium. For example, Hermippos. And he says, from Cyrene, Silphium stalks and oxhide. Then we have some pieces of information in Theophrastus about the morphology of that plant. And this is when we combine that it's probably endemic for Cyrenaican region, and how the Silphium looked like. Would be like this. So the Silphium has numerous thick roots, a stem like a ferula, and a leaf that they call maspeton, which is very similar to celery. Its seeds is broad, resembling a leaf, and it's called phyllon. The stem is annual, like ferula. So we already have the coincidence that Theophrastus notices that it's pretty similar to another plant. So. And it's, on one hand, this is a very useful piece of information, but on the other hand, is this another type species of ferula or a distinctive plant? We don't have the plant, unfortunately, because the plant got extinct in 1st century AD. The last to have a stem was supposed to be narrow, and that's it. And that finishes the story of Silphium because it disappeared. The reasons why it disappeared are vastly commented. Let's not focus right now on that topic. But unfortunately, we have lost it. Probably we will never be able to get it back. Though I have read a few weeks ago an article about archaeobotanists and botanists that revived a plant that was lost for like 5,000 years. And now it's growing in the laboratory. So maybe, Sally, maybe we will have a Silphium back.
Maybe.
Let's see. Silphium was very important produce for Cyrene and the Cyrenaican region. That important that is even depicted on coins. And here we have some few examples of coins and the seeds, probably the seeds, how they were depicted. Maybe better examples, how it looked like. More. The newer one. So we can see distinctly that it is a plant with a very distinctive features. Now the problem is, what is that? If we are able to assign any kind of species. Now, a very interesting thing, Japanese artist Asuka Hishiki, she specializes in reconstructing of plants and animals that are extinct based on the descriptions found in literature. And this is how she says Silphium. What we have here, so archaeobotanist, archaeologist, classicist, anyone who touches Silphium is trying to assign any kind of species that will fit the description presented by Theophrastus. So we have several options. Ferula asafoetida, which was actually the ersatz of Silphium in the antiquity, or maybe Silphium itself. Who knows? God only knows right now. We lost the plant, so we are not sure. Maybe Ferula communis. It looks pretty similar. We have other options like Angelica, Tapsia, Salvia sylvatica, or as Professor Spalik from University of Warsaw, he says that maybe the Lacerpitium is simply the laser, which is right now, in Polish, I think it's called auction. However, well, I'm on his side because it might be endemic. However, we still don't know. Yeah, exactly.
A little thing.
It's a little thing. It's not that big, not that impressive. So I guess we will remain with the be left with the enigma. Thank you so much for the attention, for the small introduction to Silphium. I hope you are interested, because we need more people to do that, to help us identify Silphium. So if you are interested and if you want to join us, do it, please. It would be very nice to have more. One of, I don't know if Sally is going to mention Mahmoud Miski.
Of course,
yes.
Miski.
I think he is the closest one so far. It's I think that the newest achievement that he found the plant that fits the description. So let's hope that we will be closer. So thanks once again. I hope you enjoyed that small introduction, and that's all from me, from my side. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much.
And now
It's me.
our main start. So sorry.
Thank you so much.
We had the introduction, and some materials will be covered. Key materials will be also covered with
The main core.
It's a great honour to be here. I want to thank everyone for the invitation. I wanted to talk about the practicalities of cooking the genus of plants known as Ferula and their resinous byproducts, which the ancients called Silphium. However, this is a lecture in two halves. First, we must take a journey through the evidence and provide some context. Some of the evidence will be the same as what we've heard already, but I'll have a different take on it. In my survey, I will always be stressing the look, the feel, the taste, and the smell of these things, as this has always been my main focus in all the work I do. Silphium was, as we've heard, a miraculous plant that only grew in Cyrenaican in Libya. The plant and its byproducts were valued greatly by the ancient Greeks from the 5th century onwards, but we also lack a real understanding of why it was so precious. Later sources, often referencing the substitute Silphium, which we will talk about power and strength. And it's the power and strength in medicine that is the key. It has value as a culinary spice and a herb, but that is difficult to see. The original plant became extinct, late 1st century BC, early 1st century AD, thereabouts. And we know a substitute became part of the trade. And I think they were traded side by side. This substitute is securely understood to be the numerous Ferula species from Iran and Afghanistan that produce the resin known as asafoetida. So this much we know. This is as far as we can go. The general consensus today amongst botanists is for Silphium to be the genus Ferula, but there, of course, are other views, as we've heard. Theophrastus describes the plant as Ferula-like, i.e. related to similar resembling plants such as giant fennel, which we call Ferula communis. The modern species includes potentially 180 flowering plants in the family of Apiaceae. The genus is native to the Mediterranean region, but it also is east into Central Asia and predominantly Iran and Afghanistan, where numerous native distinctive members of the genus generate an oleogum resin with a medicinal and culinary role today. We have some idea of the original plant's appearance because the Cyrenaicans conveniently place detailed images of the plant on their coins. Many of the images are quite stylized and don't allow any clear identification beyond the already familiar characteristics of a ferula today, i.e. it's umbelliferous, the flowers, the stem is hollow with marked striations, and a design in which the flowering branches are opposite each other with pronounced sheaths at the base, and the seeds of ferulas tend to be large and flat with striations too, and not like the illustration, which appears to be heart-shaped. In many cases, the plant is rendered on coins with an obvious ithyphallic manner, as can be seen here. Lock that up.
Yeah. Oh, there you go.
As can be seen here. Forward and back. The ancients don't make direct reference to the sexual imagery at all. But these images may nevertheless suggest that they considered the plant to have value as an aphrodisiac. It also seems likely that the strange heart-shaped seed pod, may have been rendered this way to invoke testicular imagery. Many of you will be aware of the recent discovery of a ferula in Anatolia, which has been suggested as the lost Silphium. I will speak more about this discovery, but for now, Mehmet Miski, the pharmacologist who discovered it, has highlighted the shape of the seeds of this plant called Ferula drudeana and suggested the coins actually illustrate the seed. Others have noted that the seeds may have been rendered in this odd sharp heart shape to actually represent testicles. I think it's fairly obvious that they represent testicles, to be honest. He's also been able to demonstrate in the laboratory that the drudeana resin has aphrodisiac properties. In fact, the plantation where he grows Ferula drudeana is under threat from the local men of the area who used to harvest it themselves. In fact, a number of Ferula resins, including Ferula asafoetida, have similar properties both in the laboratory and in traditional medicine. As we've heard, the fruit and seed of Silphium, according to Theophrastus, is flat and is a flat fruit. It's rather leaf-like and it's called phylon, meaning leaf. The heart shape in the seed is unusual in nature and appears to be a contrived design to highlight the now extremely well-recognised aphrodisiac benefits of the resin from these plants. As we will see shortly, Ferula resins had recognised gynecological properties too. Many Ferula plants have large, thick, hollow stems, as we can see here. The asafoetida stem on the right is a phenomenal structure. The stem of the giant fennel is a little narrower and was used to make walking sticks and sticks for punishment. And it is also ferulas that Prometheus used to carry fire in the eponymous myth. And finally, as an example, Ferula gomosa produces galvanum, which is a resin that goes into some of the most expensive perfumes. It's a very green smell, wonderfully green smell. Cyrenaic Silphium is a very complex story of myth and reality. The myth is that the plant material from the apparently extinct Cyrenaican Silphion had miraculous properties and was worth its weight in silver, while the resin derived from the other species of Ferula that replaced Silphium in the early 1st century AD was a second-rate substitute. This is the impression one gets from Pliny and Dioscorides. The ancients tell us that Cyrenaican Silphium was uniquely special. And I think, controversially, maybe we should question this belief. After all, there might be just a little bit of commercial spin attached to the very reputation of Silphium. From this, you will see that I want to raise the profile of the other resins, known as Parthian, Median, and Assyrian versions of Silphium, and suggest that we haven't really lost Silphium at all. We are just not able to see that the whole family of Ferulas from the Middle East were and are very special in terms of medicine and food. I suspect the reputation of Silphium is somewhat exaggerated, and this is partly due to the extinction, of course. Being lost, it becomes a holy grail to be mythologized. Asafoetida, on the other hand, is called nasty and stinky, and later it is demonized. Literally, it's called devil's dung. And it's viewed certainly by some ancient writers and many modern scholars as an inferior ersatz substitute. It has a notorious smell which is due to the sulfur compounds that actually creates a highly desirable, intense garlicky fermented onion flavour in food when used with care. Dioscorides is the writer who calls it nasty, but I don't think it's nasty. It is an acquired taste for sure. It's vastly appreciated by those who have experienced it and know how to cook with it. And by that, I mean people who like Indian food and go to Indian restaurants. If you have a good Indian restaurant in this city, you will have tasted it, even though you don't know. In passing, I should note that inexperienced use of asafoetida can be hazardous. Don't you think? There's no doubt that if you use too much, it is quite unpleasant. But this is true of many spices if you use too much. Someone unfamiliar with a good farmhouse camembert would say it smelt of the stable compost heap, and frequently it does, because I insist it goes outside when we buy some. But it tastes heavenly, and the same issues apply with asafoetida. Cyrenaican Silphium is said to smell of myrrh, and it is interesting to note that the newly recognised Ferula species from Anatolia discovered by Mammoth Miski, Ferula drudeana, does smell delightful of myrrh. When handled carefully, can taste delightful too. This is a strong indication that this plant could be a Silphium, more closely associated with the original from Libya. It has become clear that there were many different Ferula plants able to supply resins that were subsequently considered to be Silphium and Lhasa by the ancients. The story of the lost one is a delightful myth, I think, but a myth nonetheless. I remain detached from the debate in terms of the claim that drudeana is Silphium, but it is undoubtedly another immensely important medicinal plant. Many Ferula species, including particularly asafoetida, are currently being researched for new drugs. They contain unique compounds that are now recognised as immensely valuable in the treatment of cancer, particularly. But the ancients already knew this, it seems. I don't want to dwell too much on the story of the original resin that grew in Cyrenaica. The story of its extinction is familiar, I think. The local economy thrived on exporting the many forms of the plant into the Greek world and subsequently the Roman world. Recent research into illustrations on the coins from Cyrene has suggested that the period of the greatest trade in the plant, when the coins were most prolific, was before 200 BC. It's possible the decline in access to true Silphium began that early, which is quite a revelation when you think about it. There is agreement that the term Silphium is not Indo-European, and various scholars offer Chaldean, Berber, and Semitic languages as the origin. The terminology for the plant and all its products is complex. The plant is called Silphion in Greek, and the resin Opos Silphion. In Latin, the terminology is more complex. The juice or resin was named as Serpi when it was found in Plautus, which seems to be derived from the alternative spelling of Silphion as Serfi, which may be a Berber word. In Latin, Lhasa is the resin, while Lhasa picium can mean the whole plant. An obscure 2nd century grammarian called Flavius Capper adds confusion by saying Lhasa picium is a flower, probably meaning the whole plant, but they say Lhasa is a stalk. Clearly, Lhasa is potentially a resin derived from the stalk, so he's a little confused. Everybody's confused. Scholars cited in Gemmel's 1966 article in the Bulletin of the History of Medicine suggest the Romans may have taken the original word Serfi and converted it to serpicium, which combined with lac, meaning juice or resin, formed the Lhasa picium that we know. The stem Kaulos was also widely traded in the Greek world, though it is not clear that it figured much in the Roman world. The root, rhiza, was a separate commodity too, and was later known as Sulphurous radicem in the medicinal and culinary sources of the Roman period. Theophrastus in 310 is closer to Cyrenaic Silphium than anyone else, but he says only that the juice of Silphium is pungent, as is the Silphium plant itself. Drymou is the word in Greek. It has a wider meaning of acrid, sharp. I should point out that all resins from these plants, regardless of what they are, where they come from, are in fact pungent and acrid and even bitter, not natural culinary ingredients. Asafoetida is an exception in a sense, but it also tastes not that pleasant on the tongue if you take it neat. You're not supposed to take it neat. Though the resin is clearly valued, there is no indication in Theophrastus as to how it was used in medicine or food. A much later medicinal text from Areteus, the Greek doctor from Cappadocia in the 3rd century AD, offers the following remedy for tetanus. But if there be a good supply of the juice of the Silphium from Cyrene, wrap it to the amount of a tar, that is, a vetch seed, in boiled honey, i.e. toffee, and give it to swallow. It is best given in this way, as it slips unperceived through the palate, for it is acrid and occasions disagreeable eructations, being a substance which has a bad smell. But he's talking about Silphium from Cyrene, so what's going on? There's a contradiction here and a problem about which resin is being discussed. There are many options. This could be a very old remedy from a much earlier Greek text, when Cyrenaic Larsa was available, and we therefore have a sense that it was as disagreeable as asafoetida. Alternatively, the remedy is more contemporary, and Cyrenaic Larsa is still available and still disagreeable. And finally, when the late Roman trader sells asafoetida resin, they claim it's from Cyrenaica, even though it's not. There's an even more bizarre option, that asafoetida bearing Ferula plants are growing in Libya and producing a resin, so the trader isn't really lying, even though it's not Cyrenaic Silphium anymore. So now we look at Dioscorides in 50 AD, describing Silphium as myrrh-like, with a powerful scent, not rough, not greenish. The Cyrenaic, even if one just tastes it, at once it arouses a humour throughout the body, and it has a very healthy aroma, not noticed on the breath. Median and Syrian Silphium, weaker in power and a nasty smell. One does need to ask whether Dioscorides had any first-hand information about Cyrenaic Silphium. According to Pliny, the answer would be no. Of course, he tells us that it is extinct. These statements are rather vague. What is a healthy aroma? I don't know. How do we contrast this with the pungent and sharp of 350 years earlier? And also, how does one interpret the idea of a humour throughout the body in this context? There is a sense that he doesn't really know. He's trying too hard to contrast the two varieties. The one is lovely, the other is nasty. Andrew Dolby has suggested that these writers probably had limited experience of the plant or the resin itself in its raw state. According to Theophrastus, the resin was exported to Piraeus, then mixed with flour to stabilise it. But that would have changed its character. It would have become a powder. Even then, they wouldn't necessarily see it at all. There was a later trade in what's called larsa vivum, as seen in Apicius. We'll talk about that later. But I think it's quite rare for that kind of larsa, even if it's asafoetida, to be traded that widely. I've elsewhere argued that the ancient kitchen was a veiled and covert place where wealthy consumers rarely entered, and it was slaves who did the purchasing and often the compounding of the medications. Wealthy Greeks and Romans may have desired these things and wanted others to know they had access to them, but were they really able to understand Silphium or larsa? And I do wonder. In the Greek world, the culinary virtues of Silphium are dominated by its use as a vegetable. There are many more references to the stem and root being eaten than the resin. Antiphanes, anything good is Silphium stem. Silphium leaves Silphium resin. A stem is eaten always, according to Theophrastus, boiled and baked, while the root is eaten fresh, chopped with vinegar. Any reference to grating of Silphium, found in Aristophanes quite often, may refer to the fresh stem or root, as the resin of any of these plants is simply unsuited to being grated. We may be dealing with comedy here with Aristophanes, but at this level, I don't think they would have grated the resin. It's an oleogum resin, and it contains powerful drugs that are very bitter and acrid, as we have heard. And even if the flavour they generate in food is good, actually grating would be dangerous. Where quantities are stipulated in medicinal remedies, we find a lump of resin the size of a peppercorn, and at most a chickpea is advised. And I understand this completely because asafoetida I use at that level. That's tiny, tiny amounts. The latter, the chickpea, is actually an abortifacient. And it's designed to make you a little bit ill, to actually bring on an abortion. Larsa is not a truffle. This is what I want to say. A fragment of a comedy by Hermippus in the 5th century lists the products from around the Mediterranean and only mentions the stalk, as we've heard. A mature stem or stalk would be coarse and hard and tough, but a stem from a young plant would probably be juicy and resemble celery, I guess. I wonder how they kept the stem in good condition from Libya to mainland Greece. There are references to the leaf, presumably as a herb, dried and also traded. One of the strangest issues here, for me, is that with any culinary plant, the leaf would normally be the dominant product, but with Silphium, the leaf is barely acknowledged in ancient sources, though in fact we may be failing to recognise it in the text. Theophrastus calls the leaf mastipon and says that sheep are fattened on it. Interestingly, it is not that clear what the Greeks do with the resin, apart from its potential use in medicine. We only hear about the details of its use in remedies that are recorded in Latin copies of medicinal sources, at which time we must assume they may have been using the substitute already, i.e. asafoetida. There is, of course, some evidence to suggest that it didn't quite die out. As suggested, we've already heard about Aretaeus and the tetanus. It may have lingered in pockets and remained a rare and secret commodity. The most often quoted is the fact that the early 5th century bishop of Cyrene, Synesius, wrote that excellent Silphium could still be found in Cyrene. We may not be able to take this account at face value, of course, as we've noted. And I should also point out that if there was money to be made, then traders would surely have adulterated and misidentified resins for profit. We know adulteration was quite common. We hear that from all the writers. Pliny explains that other forms of the resin and plant material are now found in the Eastern Empire. They are still called Silphium and Larsa, and in fact, throughout the entire classical period, the term Silphium and Larsa is applied to the non-Cyrenaic product. The plant must have been very similar in shape, generated products of a similar nature, if we can put the smell aside, and the smell is the issue, of course. The earlier one is nice, the later one is nasty. The story of the discovery of the substitute Silphium is recorded in Strabo in circa 329 during Alexander's army and his meanderings in northern India and Afghanistan. They travelled through Bactria. The army was starving and they likely consumed their horse meat raw alongside a digestive that is identified as Silphium, which grew plentifully apparently. It's not at all clear that the resin played any part in this meal, and it may have been the fresh stem as the accompaniment, freshly cut as a vegetable to help the raw meat down. It is apparent that Theophrastus in 310 was able to include in his inquiry into plants information on new species gleaned from the travellers back from the east. He does not allude to the discovery of Parthian Silphium, but he does tell his readers about a new plant that he's heard of, similar to Silphion, which is called Magidaris. It's growing in Syria and even Mount Parnassus, on the Greek mainland, under the noses of the Greeks, as it were. He does not know how similar it is or whether it produces a resin. Is this one of the asafoetida-bearing ferulas? In Plautus's play The Rope, set in the city of Cyrene and written about 200 BC, traders wish each other a safe cargo. And they talk about their cargo of serpi and larsopicium, that is the resin and the plant material, we guess. One also says, be sure of plenty of Magidaris on the way. Are we seeing the trade in this new plant alongside Silphium in the imaginary world of Plautus? Maybe. It's no more than a hint, but it's possible that Cyrenaican and Syrian Lassa were being traded as early as 200 BC side by side, and being labelled as the better one when in fact it was the stinky one. I do find the similarity between the two quite startling. This is Ferula asafoetida from an area that's called now Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. This is the original area where Alexander's men were travelling. It's obviously not surprising that the Greeks recognised this plant as one of the same family if they had seen coins or other descriptions, or actually had some interest in it. Interesting to note that the indigenous population of Bactria already included a high percentage of Greeks even before Alexander's army arrived in 329. Prisoners, in fact, from the Persian Wars 100 years before were exiled there. So there may have been some understanding. Strabo gives us a little hint that the ancients themselves were largely ignorant as to the nature and origin of much of the resin that they identified as Silphium. Strabo is talking of the Median Silphium, i.e. Iran. This I find the most fascinating of all the passages. The country also produces Silphium, whence the Medic juice, as it is called, which in general is inferior to the Cyrenaic juice, but sometimes it is superior to it, either owing to regional differences or because of a variation in the species of the plant, or even owing to the people who extract and prepare the juice in such a way as to conserve its strength for storage and use. The Median juice was genuinely considered the same as Silphium. This also highlights the fact that they recognised there were many different plant species that generated a resin that they collectively knew as Silphium. There are 30 different Ferula species in Iran alone. If the resin from the eastern Silphium was sometimes considered to be of the same quality or better than the Cyrenaic, then this rather muddies the water, does it not? The power and strength of these products are not defined, and we lack an understanding. The terminology used surely indicates we are dealing with medicinal power of the resin to heal. There doesn't seem to be much culinary context at all in relation to the resin. Incidentally, wonderful image of the resin oozing from an asafoetida root. That's what it looks like when it's first harvested. It's sticky, and I was given a packet of it. Beautiful stuff. Very powerful smell. Here's a regional map of the areas that are said to produce plants now that are considered Silphium producing. Now, today, in Iran, the most common asafoetida-bearing plants are also taken as a vegetable, and this. I cried out with joy when I saw this online. This is how asafoetida is harvested as a vegetable for local markets in Iran. Looks like celery. It's wonderful. Striking how much it resembles things like modern vegetables. This must have been how it looked when the vegetable matter was delivered to the Greek mainland. The distances involved in transporting this kind of product from Libya to Greece mainland would undoubtedly result in some loss of quality. But it probably arrived in a decent enough condition to be considered a vegetable. And of course, it may have been pickled too. The distances involved between Iran and Rome must, I think, preclude any possibility of the Romans being able to access the vegetable as food, even despite the fact that we hear about the last stem being given to Nero. I think it was probably a bit of a joke, I suspect. I was immensely struck by this image when I found it. It brings Silphium into stark focus. It brings the very idea of a Silphium down to earth. It looks insubstantial, even shatters the myth a little. Is this really what all the fuss was about? And it also must be noted, I think, that if you prevent a vulnerable plant from blooming by taking it in this state, it's not surprising it died out. This is foliage of drudeana from Istanbul. I took this picture at the Botanical Gardens in Istanbul, the picture on the right. But sadly, I was being guided round the gardens, and I was prevented from harvesting any leaf. I was desperate to take some, but I was not allowed to. I was working there with Mammoth Miski on experiments to cook with the new resin to see whether we could get closer to understanding its relationship to the original. So here's Mammoth Miski with me in my apron doing recipes, and to the left in the left image and the left person is Taras Gresko, who wrote an article in the National Geographic about our experiments. And you can see the plant material and the roots and how they are black and juicy on the inside, and lots of resin was coming out of the stem. Just a little brief image of the cup that we've seen before, and I just want to say, yes, probably depicting, I think, possibly more of the vegetable matter than the resin, but there are kind of amphoras. Maybe the resin was there in those amphoras, we don't know. Dioscorides in 50 AD says that the new Silphium that grows in Syria, Armenia, Media, as well as Libya, they are all Silphium to him. His description is largely copied from Theophrastus, but he also seems to have knowledge of the current trade in Median and Syrian Silphium. He alludes to the possibility that the resin on the market may have been adulterated before it dries by mixing with Sagopinum. This is a Ferula plant native to the Middle East, which adulterates asafoetida today. Now, Sagopinum, I have some Sagopinum for you to smell if you'd like, and for people to taste tomorrow. It smells myrrh-like in exactly the same way that drudeana smells myrrh-like. There is no sulphur, the asafoetida sulphur. Pliny omits the Armenian form and says that the resins currently available are rated in order. First in quality is Parthian, that is Iran. Second is Syrian, and third is Median, which is northern Iran and Anatolia. In the modern world, there are 4 Ferula species and 1 recognised common adulterant, the Sagopinum I mentioned earlier. They generate an oleogum resin, which is collectively known as asafoetida. All are native to a high-altitude, arid climate in Central Asia. The modern genus of Ferula has a Latin root meaning vehicle or carrier in Persian, as in the means of carrying fire in the Prometheus myth, and asa meaning resin or juice from lac. Foetida originates from the Latin word foetidus, fetid and stinky, once again, fetid and stinky. In traditional harvesting in Iran and Afghanistan, the plant is allowed to flower, and at the end of the season, the stem is cut and the root is exposed, and regular cutting takes place to promote the flow of the resin. Slices of root are cut away and often simply discarded. Other techniques can allow the slice and the resin to be taken together. A mature plant of about 5 years has a root of about 12 to 15 centimetre diameter, and each plant can yield as much as 900 kilograms of resin. The trade in asafoetida resin from Iran today is in thousands of tons. Vast quantities of it are traded. It's harvested in many different ways. The soft, fresh, milky liquid that you see can be taken as it oozes, and in some cases, this is when it's adulterated with other resins, because it's easy to do so when it's soft, and therefore it's not valued as much, but it's easier to gather. The root is recut very quickly, and more of the resin flows out. The alternative way is to leave the white resin covered, protected with little roofs over each root until it dries out, and then it's scraped off in clumps. And this type of asafoetida is most valued. The first resin to be collected is known as tears and is the most valued and pure, while the later exudations from the plant, as it becomes exhausted and of course dies because you exhaust the plant completely, are known as mass and are less valued, and more often compounded into cheaper products. The description in Theophrastus of the harvesting of Cyrenaic Silphium is virtually the same, and there's no need to repeat it. This is my stash. This is, on the left is the resin that I received when it was soft like a putty, and over time it hardened into a almost a glass-like appearance. and the mass on the right is much softer and stickier and harder to work with. I get the impression that when the root is included in the processing, it is considered a kind of adulteration to create an even cheaper form of asafoetida. There's so many different grades of asafoetida, it's very hard to find the best one. If you use the root as well, of course, it bulks it up in powdered form. We may be dealing with a similar situation in relation to the occurrence of Larsa radicem in Roman recipes. This product may have served as the most common form of asafoetida on the market, as when I say asafoetida, I mean Larsa in Roman markets, as it is a product and not as it is this product and not the resin that occurs most often in the culinary recipes. Now, after a long and fruitless searches on the internet and endless emails to people who wouldn't talk to me, either because they didn't speak English or because they wouldn't speak to a woman, sadly, I finally found a trader who was in direct contact with a farmer growing asafoetida on a small estate in northern Iran. At this estate, the root slice is taken off and thrown into the undergrowth. I had to convince my spice trader to convince the farmer to save some and send it to me along with a little bit of this year's harvest. As I speak, it has not arrived. He promised me that it would come before I got to Poland, and it didn't. So my expectation, my theory, given that asafoetida can be vastly different in strength or flavour depending on its quality, that the root will have less sulphur compounds and create less of a smell and less pungency. I want to know whether the root will contribute a different taste profile to the resin in Roman recipes that call for it in Apicius. I have drudeana root, but we can play around with drudeana root tomorrow. In modern commerce, the pure resin is not very often brought domestically. Rather, the tears resin are bought in bulk and processed in India, dried and powdered with flour and bean meal to prevent clumping, and often turmeric is added, which is often labelled yellow powder rather than asafoetida. The addition of flour to stabilise the resin was also practised when harvesting Silphium, according to Theophrastus. They were only added to the juice from the stem, which appears to have been less stable. Many years ago, I received a little bag of the asafoetida resin, as I described, and it was soft. Now it's hard. It's been 8 years, and it is still as powerful and as pungent as ever it was. The crop is managed by farmers, but not cultivated, so it behaves in a similar way to the ancient plant. The plant sets seed in the surrounding area without any interference from the farmer, and in fact, attempts to cultivate it are less than successful. Once the resin is exported, batches are often blended and adulterated, as we've heard. And this means that botanical identification of the individual Ferula species when testing the resins that you buy from the market is impossible. This is immensely problematic for modern research into the medicinal properties of the resin. And of course, the plants are under threat in many areas, not least because of the political situation. We're nearly on the cooking, but not quite. It's taken a long time. I do need to deal briefly with the medicinal properties of these plants, and particularly the resins. This is not an area I have any expertise in at all. I am entirely relying on the various studies that I've read, and my pronunciation of some of the drugs are a bit shaky. We all need to have an understanding that the Middle Eastern Silphiums, i.e. asafoetida, are just as miraculous a medicinal plant as the Cyrenaic Silphium was or appears to be in the ancient world, maybe even better. There is considerable power and strength in many of the Ferula resins, and they are one of the most valuable components of traditional medicine in Iran, Afghanistan, and India. Modern scientific research into the effects of the resins on bodily functions are able to demonstrate that the perceived benefits of the original Larsa and the substitute are in fact absolutely accurate. They do what they thought they did. So, anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory, anti-tumour, antiviral, antibacterial, antispasmodic, anti-ulcer, protects the liver, protects the kidneys, it's a sedative, a tranquilizer. All these things have been tested, and they've demonstrated that these drugs work. The compounds most effective as medicine are the secondary metabolites also known as sesquiterpenes and sesquiterpene cormoran ethers. I've done it, I've said it. These are chemicals created by the herbaceous plant to protect themselves from predation. And luckily for humans, these are also the desirable flavours we find in many herbs and spices. The power and strength of Silphium and Silphium was medicinal. Pliny tells us that the lassa he knows, almost certainly asafoetida, is used in very many medicinal preparations. It is used against chills, alleviates pains in sinews, it treats corns, diuretic, aids digestion, neutralizes poisons, heals boils, dog bites, hemorrhoids, cough, gout, sciatica, lumbago. The list is endless. I want to stress these are conditions treated with asafoetida. In explaining this phenomenon to a friend, she had the inspiration to suggest that the metabolites that treat particular conditions behave like a heat-seeking missile directed at the source of the illness. This is how traditional medicine works. It's a broad spectrum approach, unlike modern medicine, where, of course, doctors seek to isolate drugs for particular conditions. Now, we believe, I think, that Silphium was used as an abortive.
Yes.
We know that asafoetida was used as an abortive. Cyrenaican was a medical doctor responsible for a gynecological treatise, which I bought a copy of. It's wonderful. I love reading it. He knows so much, he understands so much about the female body, and yet suddenly he goes, no, you don't know anything. It's great. It's dated to about 100 AD. He cites Cyrenaic juice, i.e. lassa, as a means of promoting menstruation, i.e. it is potentially a kind of morning after pill. The image does suggest that the original Silphium had a special significance for women. Asafoetida, derived from many of the Ferulas, is used in precisely the same way today over much of the Middle East. It's an emmenagogue, that's what they call it. So it's an effective contraceptive. We have no idea whether Cyrenaican had Cyrenaic or Parthian Silphium, but it really doesn't matter, as they apparently had the same medicinal effect. What is clear, though, is that these Ferula resins are powerful medicinal drugs, and the apparent special unique status of Cyrenaic Silphium is under some doubt. Cyrenaic lassa definitely smelt better, but how was it actually very useful in food? And there's the question. We're on the final leg. The actual cooking can be discussed. I should say most of the practicalities of the recipes themselves and what we actually do will be talked about tomorrow. I'm just going to cover it briefly. We can be fairly certain that the majority of the recipes were written at a time when there was little expectation of being able to acquire any form of Cyrenaic, Silphium or lassa. Even if it was still available, it was probably very scarce. We find an oblique reference to the possibility of the original still in a remedy from Scribonius Largus. Cyrenaic lassa, if one can get it, if not Syrian. There is a world of difference between how Silphium resin and asafoetida resin was used in the ancient recipes. There are just two references to the original resin in Apicius. It is melted into water and blended with an oxygarum, that is just vinegar and fish sauce. It's a very simple sauce which, when made with Ferula drudeana resin, actually highlights the delicate flavour, which is, as I said, green, vegetal, but also myrrh-like, perfumed, resinous. Parthian lassa is also an option here, but the experience is very different. You can still do it. You can still taste it tomorrow. If, and it's a big if, Ferula drudeana is closer to the original, then the elusive flavour is best realised this way in these very simple sauces. When I increased the quantity of resin to enhance the flavour, it was lost completely, and all that remained was bitterness. Adding drudeana resin to dishes that are cooked at length and at high temperatures also leads to complete flavour loss and bitterness. When I experimented with galbanum, the same situation applies. The flavours are very unstable. I'm inclined to believe that Silphium, lassa, had limited culinary uses because these myrrh-like flavours are delicate and volatile by nature. I also think that it's likely that when it was offered at elite banquets, it needed to be obvious. If it disappeared in more complex sauces, and let's be honest, Roman food is very complex, a delicate flavour like that would disappear. your guest needed to know you had this special spice. The root of drudeana has a little more to offer as the flavour is more sustainable, but crucially it's still subtle to the point of disappointment if it's Silphium. Tomorrow we will be sampling these oxygarum sauces with drudeana, with sagopinum, with galbanum, and with the pure asafoetida resin. And it's a tiny little drop that you'll get, but you'll get that flavour, the pure flavour. Asafoetida is an upfront root of a flavour that is hard to lose, even in the most complex of Roman sauces. Its flavour is essentially a combination of fermented onion and garlic, which when used with great delicacy adds a depth of flavour missing from ancient food. Recipes invariably begin by putting spices and herbs with cold liquids in a mortar. There's a lack of depth that has also always disappointed me. And I'm familiar with Mediterranean food, and we all are, and we know that there's something missing from these sauces, and it's asafoetida. The Mediterranean habit of slow stewed onion and garlic is missing from ancient food entirely, and I've always regretted it. I can tell you that Parthian larsa provides that missing base note of flavour, as long as it's used with care. Asafoetida is fundamental to Hindu vegetarian cooking in India, and they actually reject onion and garlic because it's associated with meat. They can teach us how to use it. When it's powdered, 2 finger pinches to each 1/4 kilo of food. This is tiny. Many's the meal I have ruined by using too much. 2 finger pinches. Now, there are 66 recipes that use some form of Silphium, either resin, root, or herb, in Apicius. The resins designated larsa and larsa vivum tend to be more used in the simple sauces that I've described, that I would designate an oinogarum. They contain oil and wine and vinegar and fish sauce and minimal spicy. They're used for dressings and dips and sometimes to flavour meat before cooking as a marinade. This style allows the flavour of these expensive and desirable spices to be recognised by the guest. The resin is rarely found in sweet sauces made with dried fruits and nuts, which are quite common in Apicius. And I'm grateful for this, as it is not to my taste. The flavour of asafoetida works well with savoury, spicy, bitter sauces. Asafoetida resin is particularly good when roasted, as the intense heat tempers the sulphur, and you will discover tomorrow we will make Parthian chicken, which is a wonderful dish, stupendous. The root of asafoetida, on the other hand, is rare in oinogarum, and as you can see, it dominates in all the recipes, and particularly in thick sauces and pulse dishes. It is my belief that the root will impart a less intense sulphur flavour that may have suited these dishes. The root will, of course, have had, I think, a residual amount of resin. We will hopefully test this theory tomorrow. One last page. When it comes to the herb, we are less sure of its position in the cuisine. The herb of the plants associated with Silphium may have been rendered as Silphium in Apicius, though there is some doubt. There is a second Apicius collection of recipes, little known. It's called the Vinidaris collection. Vinidaris made this selection, and he called it an Apicius collection of recipes. And at the beginning of this collection is a list of condiments described as a summary of the flavourings which ought to be in the home so that nothing is missing from the seasoning. A long list of herbs and spices, some expensive, some not. Larsa appears separately among the expensive spices, and among the dry ingredients we see larsa roots and Silphium. So there are 3 separate commodities associated with this plant. Despite the fact that Silphium is elsewhere described as another word for root, it cannot mean the root here, as we've already got it, so it must mean the herb. Roman cooks undoubtedly developed techniques for using all these products, asafoetida resin, herb and root in their cooking, adding resin for maximum flavour, root when something more subtle was required. The root is found particularly in relatively modest, simple cooking, all manner of pulse dishes, simple vegetables, undoubtedly consumed quite widely, not elite. Believe they're not elite. And with this in mind, the final thing I want to discuss is the question of availability. The frequency in which larsa root rather than resin was found in the Apicius recipes suggests to me that it was readily available in Roman markets and within the pocket of many aspiring cooks and middle-rank households. Cyrenaic silphium was surely always expensive when available, but it's not clear that the resins and roots of Parthian, Median, and Syrian asafoetida were expensive. I suspect the economies of scale allowed many people to use the spice as the markets will have been flooded with compounded and adulterated products that gave a very basic, very ordinary, desirable, mild onion garlic flavour to food. Pliny implies availability. He talks about these resins being in abundance in the markets. When I set out to write this paper, I did not intend to bust the myth of silphium. I may not have done so, I don't know. You tell me. 400 years between the period of the greatest trade in silphium and the time when the majority of recipes and remedies were written down prevents any clear understanding of the plant and its use. And this is true for the Romans just as much as it is true for us. They didn't understand it. We don't understand it. The myth was perpetuated by generations of Greeks and Romans and by generations of classicists who were fascinated by the mystery of a miraculous plant with magical powers. In terms of the power to heal, Parthian and Syrian lassa have been demonstrated to be as good, if not better. From a culinary perspective, too, I think it may be possible to suggest that asafoetida is more useful in the kitchen than the original. We will be able to judge tomorrow if this is correct. I thank you.
If you allow us a short discussion.
Yes,
some
please.
questions.
I'm sorry. Did I speak for too long? I wasn't sure.
No,
No.
it was fascinating. Too short.
Exactly. Too short.
Too short.
Too short. Thank you, Maciej.
Too short. Definitely too short. I mean, for myself. No, I'm sorry, maybe I start. I've
Yes,
got my
please do.
own picture of something like a variety of different things. Like, for instance, today you've got better pepper, worse pepper.
Yes.
You've got something like, for instance, saffron, and you go to the bazaar and they tell you that they've got those stacks of saffron.
And it's
it
from
isn't
Spain.
saffron, but it's just
It's from
knockoff.
Spain. Yes, I know.
It doesn't smell. It has a very different flavor. It looks different, but they say that this is saffron. Why, it isn't saffron. Yeah, turmeric.
It's turmeric. Yeah, there's so much opportunity to make money.
Yes, exactly. So I presume that in antiquity they had the same. So they had a variety of similar products. And one more factor, you mentioned adulteration, which is so often in Pliny, but also, for instance, in Dioscorides. And I just think that all those roots of this come to Niger, who was the first, who was probably giving an overview of ways of adulterating those famous products.
Yeah.
So I think that there is a high probability that silphium still exists. We do not know. No, you don't think so?
No, I think it exists, yes. I
Yes,
think it'll be there
it is,
somewhere.
and probably out of the range you mentioned, one of them is exactly this silphium.
Yeah.
I was just fascinated with a simple story that during the time of Nero, the last supply or shipment arrived. Just like, for instance, the last succubus was made, yes, and no longer they produce fowler because, and I think this was a very attractive way of summarizing all the knowledge by Pliny. But not necessarily it was the truth about the wine or the spice you mentioned.
Who's not?
In the meantime, may I have some?
Yes, please do.
With my using mobile all the time, I was just checking some things because although I'm not a historian who would touch or tackle food or medicine. I was also mesmerized by this story of disappearing silphium. And I remember a paper of Florence Totley about Pharmacon of Mithridates VI. And there was an interesting part of it showing a certain fashion which appeared or was ever bigger as the empire was ever bigger. So the taste of the richest people, or those who needed the most exquisite products from the market, was also to have original things from this or that province, this or that territory. And they gave it a name, of course, of the province, and that's why they loved it. They bought it for huge sums of money. And at the same time, Silphium is disappearing. So, out of many questions, just a few. One of them would be, and sorry if I misunderstood anything of both of you.
I'm sorry if I spoke too fast.
How come they mythologized the extinction of this, and they just of this Silphium of Kyrene, and they haven't turned just immediately for money to other markets, promising markets with other Silphium, not only as Horizonts, but precisely that or similar Silphium would be at the moment. Another question is, could they use both drudeana and asafoetida as Silphium to do different? So maybe now the two questions, and then if you allow me, just two more.
I'm not sure, to be honest. I mean, the transition between Silphium Lhasa being on the market and not is dark to us. We don't know it. All the evidence that we have, we've given you. So there's nothing hiding there that we could add to it. Why? I think it was probably from Plautus in 200 AD. It's clearly they are being traded side by side. I think that's what that means. And Magidaris is asafoetida.
Yes, I think that they were both sold at the same time, so the original and the Horizonts.
It's hidden. I mean, they don't talk about it, and I think maybe they don't talk about it because even then it was commonplace and widely used.
Yes, exactly.
And not elite anymore. And not elite anymore.
So you think that when it starts to disappear, and even when it has disappeared, you look back with this power of nostalgia at a product which, if only we could get this. It's so better than the stuff we've got, when actually there isn't very much difference between it. But you are looking back, it's always looking back to a golden age. Maybe that's what's going on. I love the idea that you rebrand stuff.
Oh, God.
You know, sort of, you go to the market and a merchant promises you faithfully that this is 300 it's from Cyrenaican. I swear. Number 5. He's bought it on mats, and it's all mixed up with other stuff. But it's like branding, I suppose. Ultimately, it's one of those powers of also feeling that you have got access to a really exclusive product, and then later, when we know that it disappears from the market altogether, you hark back to a time when it existed, even though these other products have come along as well, and they may be just as good. You don't say that they're the same, because then that one loses its cachet. I'm trying to think of a modern parallel. But any kind of heritage or nostalgia.
That has been lost, completely lost. It's quite rare. That's why it's such a wonderful story, because it seems to be completely lost. That sort of
The Cyrenaican,
so many people actually remember from their classics degrees hearing about this moss spice. It was the one thing that they didn't remember.
And Nero eating the last stalk, he would, wouldn't he?
I don't know.
the stories that he told, that's told in the Fiscus. Yeah, that it was so valuable that he needed to store it away from the people, because it's so the last example.
I haven't mentioned it. I didn't mention at all, but there are in the treasury they kept asafoetida instead of money. It was so valuable, and there's talk about thousands of pounds of it.
And what is very interesting to me, for example, when I read for the first time when I met Silphium, it was like the piece of information. I know if it's Pliny or Theophrastus, that sheep were fed with the plant.
That foliage that we saw.
Yeah.
Yes.
To give their meat a specific taste.
Yeah.
And that was also the reason why we don't have it at all.
No, because they
were overgrazing with that. Whoa. Seriously, like it's amazing.
You kill the plant when you take the resin.
Exactly.
Apparently there are techniques now in Iran to try and instead of cutting across and letting it ooze, they cut down, take part of the root away, and the rest of the root lives, and it will flower again and produce more resin the next year. So they're trying to keep the plants alive.
You know, still, if you pay with silver and gold for something, it is valuable.
It is.
It has.
You don't need very much.
Yeah, but
you can go to the market and buy a tiny bit. And it's true of pepper. They always say pepper is expensive, and Romans, only elite people had pepper. Yeah. But all evidence suggests that everybody had access to a bit. And you'd be amazed what a gram of pepper weight looks like on a scale. And to go to the market and buy a little twist of pepper to go around to sprinkle on your peasant food.
You ground a couple of corns.
Everybody did it. And it was too precious to lose, and so it didn't end up on the floor for archaeologists to find. And cheaper spices do end up on the floor because
it doesn't
matter if you lose them.
But in case of spices, we have the same problem nowadays with cinnamon, because we don't eat the real cinnamon.
No,
it's something different that is even more toxic.
Cassia.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So whenever we buy the packet or the stalks of cinnamon, usually we don't have the real one, unfortunately. And that's the problem with the spices.
But in the sources, you get the distinction between cinnamon and cassia.
Yeah.
So, and once again, I would like to come back to the to my hypothesis that Silphium never disappeared, because we've got evidence that were people that knew much about plants and about substances, like, for instance, Galen. And they would include Opus Cyrenaicos on the list of the so-called haplopharmaca, so active substances.
Yeah.
And Galen knew what he was talking. Then you've got the same, for instance, in Oribasius. But Oribasius was a person that was drawing on Galen, you might claim. But then there was Aetius of Amida, who practiced for a very long time. And he had also his own approach, which he would always attest it. So, in my opinion, I did it, I experienced, I saw, I tasted, it was effective. So once again, if he puts Opus Cyrenaicos, that means he had contact with Opus Cyrenaicos. So that means in the 6th century, there was still Silphium.
Yes.
And the same with Paul of Egina.
He
wasn't,
talks about
the 7th century, and he wasn't a person that was borrowing from somebody else, something he didn't understand.
He was a practitioner.
We can say, yes, he was a practitioner, and very often says about his own results, or agrees or disagrees. The same, for instance, with Alexander of Tralles. So, and once people like Alexander and Aetius of the 6th century, they mention Opus Cyrenaicos, that means that they had contact with Opus Cyrenaicos and not with asafoetida, because they knew very well the difference. And they knew that the difference is in the action. And they quote a number of different recipes, different formulas, in which they put either opus or laser, or asafoetida.
Really?
Yes.
Brilliant. Send me the references.
Please.
I will try to.
Brochure is the word you're looking for. Now, I don't think we addressed this gentleman's second question.
Thank you. May I take where my boss stopped? Can we agree those stories? Because somehow I can't read of the an inkling or a feeling that they couldn't be that dummies to say in the 1 million people capital of the empire that it disappeared if it didn't, and yet it survived in other provinces.
Yeah.
But what if this, because I remember a stream of papers, of articles discussing whether it was over-harvesting or raids of barbarians or things like that, that made this specific production. If, as you said, it started in Ewesperides, which is modern Benghazi, and then to Sereni, and well, it's not that big territory, and it's not Tunisia, it's not the Magerda, Magradas Valley, it's not a wide territory.
No, it's a very narrow strip
of land.
Yeah.
So perhaps these or that reasons made this particular place as well, not anymore place of production. If you call something opos Cyrenaikos, it doesn't, 200 or 300 years later, it may mean as well just basically that it is derived from there, or it's called that way, but it's not that it is produced there. And perhaps before the over-harvesting or this raids or something else, the Silphium of Cyrene became specific, as if they were doing something with that plant. They knew that those methods to even beautify it, to beautify the taste. But my idea is also because I was cooking with asafoetida once, because I love spices. I was never very much into philosophy of the East, as it's called sometimes in orientalized way. But I was cooking with asafoetida, and just as you said, my first tries were rather miserable. Yes, indeed. But
you have to use it in pinch.
As I was listening to you, I was thinking also about comparison of Greek, Eastern Mediterranean or Roman cooking methods. I'm hearing about them from my boss and his colleagues for many years, and the differences with the Ayurvedic, which is much more tabooized and tabooizes particular kinds of food than the Mediterranean one. So my questions would be now: what if, and if the methods of using of Ferula asafoetida in the times of Vedas and in Mediterranean differed, and the way that it's coming back now to us with Indian cuisine is different than this Mediterranean. Perhaps you know anything about it, that they had these methods or procedures to extinguish this sulphurous
elements.
Yeah.
Ah, to get rid of it, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes.
Perhaps they could do it, not only, well, with Ferula asafoetida proper. And I promised the last one question. I read a paper of Lisa Briggs and Jens Jakobsson, published 2 years ago about Silphium. And they were saying that they find it very promising what was researched since the 50s in the port of Apollonia. It was port of Cyrene, and apparently some remnants of the products stayed in the shipwrecks. Of course, as Maciej said, now it's very difficult to go there, but apparently something remains. I don't remember now the whole line of argumentation, but what would it be possible to compare those remnants, those small particles of what was
Probably just
ships,
in
with what you were researching in Iran?
I think I hope so. Yes, if we can get.
If we had the material, yes.
Yes. There are. If it's traded as widely as we believe, then there's bound to be a shipwreck somewhere.
Because you seem to be so close.
Yes.
So many convincing arguments about the Iranian kinds of ferula. And those photos were also mesmerizing.
Weren't
How
they?
they use it, how they do the production, well, the mass production of a vegetable, almost, not a spice.
It was such a struggle to get to talk to a farmer, and only via a third person. And he's very sorry that he couldn't get me the route, but I will keep that relationship going as much as I can, and attempt to actually put some questions to the farmer.
So now the question is why the Cyrenaic Silphium was so valuable. What is the reason?
Because it was
It's just marketing?
Branded, yeah.
because it was a brand.
Yeah.
Just like, for instance, another story about Falernian one that disappeared, because the Falernian Ager Falerinus was destroyed due to something like flooding or something by Pliny, and then you've got Falernian wine, for instance, in Galen.
Yes, it's
So
still there.
does it mean that this is only tradition? No, I mean he compares Falernian to wines that were produced close to his hometown, to Pergamum. So he was experienced. He knew the differences in thickness, in redness, whiteness, and so on and so on and so on. He was an expert. So I would say that Pliny used to tell very convincing stories that were attractive to his public, but they were not necessarily true.
Yeah. Or they were stories that were attractive to him when he heard them.
Yes, exactly.
And he believed them.
Yes.
And he put them, there's been a problem with the Falernian wine. May only have been a temporary problem, but by the time it's been told, it becomes and once it's written down, we read, it looks like a permanent problem.
But his information is usually very literary.
It is.
And he quotes that many sources, Latin and Greek sources, medical sources. I mean, some books are mostly based, like those ones that we were researching, together into, But this is purely, say, an erudite knowledge of first century AD Roman, say, guy who could allow to buy and to be almost everywhere, and he wanted to make an impression on others. I mean, this is my picture of Pliny.
I always regarded him as he's an amateur scholar. Yeah. And we forget that his real job was being admiral of the fleet at Misenum.
But he had no choice, basically, sometimes to tell the truth from something that is not necessarily true to the very extent.
Right.
I mean, 100%.
Exactly.
That's why I prefer Theophrastus.
And sometimes he even doesn't say that others say, because, for instance, Galen or Dioscorides would always say that something is said to, or others say that.
That's right.
He goes just straight away with his story into some. He doesn't mention that he heard from someone.
No, that's not his style.
Yes, exactly.
That's like an admiral or a general.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Dr. Kompa, are you satisfied with the answer?
Satisfied.
I'm satisfied.
I think we should go back.
I'm fascinated. That's being satisfied is. I don't know how to even to answer to that. I just. Since you called me, I've got one more question. And I'm so sorry if all these questions are, to a certain extent, marred naivete. But just to put yet another puzzle for me in this fragment, asafoetida appeared in Indian cuisine with the Aryans at the era of the beginning, the Sanskrit and Vedis, or later with the Aryans from Iran?
I don't know. That's a huge question. I don't know.
That's a very good question.
Because now we say it's Ayurvedic, and everyone assumes that it's from the very start.
Work to do, Sally. Work to do. We don't know. We need to check.
I have people I can talk to who are specialised in.
It's another rabbit hole to go down.
It's another rabbit hole. Lovely.
It's lovely. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your presentation. It was once in a while there is a topic that addresses the things that are resonating in our knowledge. Even as you said, after years, the thing you remember is Silphium and some anecdotes about Caesars and most interesting personalities of antiquity. And this is one of those. So it's food for thought. Thanks.
Still more to come about Silphium, I guess. Let's hope that one day we will be able to do some more research in Libya. Maybe finding the seed. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, Mordred.
Exactly. Maybe one day. Yeah.
Are there any more questions or comments?
Online?
No one's raised any.
No.
No waste.
Thank you for turning up.
Exactly. Thank you so much.
We can't see any hands up. So, thank you, Sally.
You
Thank you,
hearing us?
Maciej. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for the agreement to come.
Wait.
Yes, we've got one.
Manuela?
Just not question. It was just thank you so much.
Thank you so
Oh, a
much.
comment.
Yeah, there was a comment. Yes.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, hello.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
okay, for me personally, it's like Maciej said, it's like dream come true. I
Well,
Always
of course.
wanted.
Oh, they're going to be here tomorrow. Oh, lovely. That's good.
Yeah, prepare your stomachs for some good cuisine.
Yes.
oh, yes, exactly. So we can.
But sorry, no peppers, bell peppers,
No
no tomato,
tomatoes.
no aubergines
No
or
string
eggplants, no string, no. Just a pure Roman cuisine, no carbonara,
No chili.
no chili, con carne, sin carne, whatever, no. Just a pure Roman
We were just on our children's workshop again. What did the Romans? No chocolate.
no chocolate,
No.
no.
Imagine the world
chips.
without potato.
No.
Ah.
No spirits, we think.
And no spirits, we think.
They had spirits.
No?
So if there are no more questions, so we can say thank you for this presentation, and we can check whether they use asafoetida, for instance, in an Indian restaurant.
Yes. Well,
Exactly.
I think-
So have fun. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for your interest.